So the second test match between the Springboks and the All Blacks has just come to a close. The Springboks getting the win by 6 and securing the Rugby Championship. And now we move on to the next stage of the Rugby Championship for the Boks, which is heading to Argentina and then a home game to finish off the competition. But in this video, I'm going to be giving my Springboks XV that I feel at the moment is the strongest they could go with heading into Argentina. Now, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. This is not what I think they will go with up against Argentina. This is just from the last couple games up against the All Blacks, what I believe is the strongest side that they could put on the field, but that they probably won't. I think that these two games up against Argentina, it is all about building depth. It's all about giving minutes to those guys who haven't had too many opportunities. So closer to the matches, I'll be giving my starting 15s for the first and second test. But this one more based off form and who I think, if they had to name their strongest side, would be in the lineup. But starting with the front row, number 1, Oxnashe, number 2, Bongio Manambi, and number 3, Franz Malharba. Now, I've already broken my own system, because if you were basing off what is strongest, you'd have Malcolm Marx as that number 2. The man has scored 3 tries throughout this Rugby Championship competition, but in this case, to keep the same front row is actually quite important for the Springboks, and Marx just brings you so much off the bench that I would rather keep that same front row and then have him come on a bit later on in the contest. But Oxnashe, I thought his scrums were strong up against the All Blacks. Definitely in that second test, we saw a little bit more pushing from the Springboks in terms of making New Zealand take a backwards step. It's exactly what they wanted to do. Franz Malharba, a big reason for that as well. I mentioned about it in that first test that Tamaiti Williams wasn't really allowed to do what he would have wanted to at scrum time, and that is because of the ability of these two men in the propping jerseys, and then bundled all together with Bongio Manambi in the middle, I believe is a very strong Springboks front row. But moving on to the locking duo. Now, we did see times where Pieter-Steph Toy found himself in the locks for a match up against the All Blacks, but I believe at the moment their strongest combination building towards the future is Ebenezebeth number 4, Ruan Nokia at number 5. Now, leading into the last game up against the All Blacks, Ruan Nokia had won the most lineouts out of any player in the Rugby Championship. And I believe with the amount that he won up against New Zealand in the recent test match, he would still be at the top of that list. Ebenezebeth, he is second in the competition for lineouts won. And Ruan Nokia, he has just thoroughly impressed me throughout these last couple matches. He's been able to get the lineout steals, and those are the big ones. Yes, you can win lineouts all you like, but it's when you're taking the ball from the opposition, when they're in an attacking position on the field, and you're able to shut that down. That kills momentum, and that is exactly what Ruan Nokia has been able to do. As of late, Ebenezebeth, big game up against the All Blacks in the second test, which is actually why I think they'll rest him in the first game up against Argentina, and then perhaps throw him into the second contest if they do end up needing him. But we move on to the loose forward trio, and what I just said about Etzebeth is actually what I believe they may look to do with this man, Sia Khaleesi. In an ideal world, injuries aside, he would still be their strongest starting 6, although there are a couple other guys who would love to get that opportunity, which I think we will see up against Argentina, such as a Mako van Staden, just to name one, could find himself with some more minutes soon. But Sia Khaleesi scoring an all-important try up against New Zealand in that second test, loves to lead from the front, took a nasty knock in test match number 1, but said, I don't want to stop playing, I want to win that Freedom Cup, the Rugby Championship too, and he has now been able to do just that. But Pieter-Steph Toy, he's my number 7, no real surprises there. They may look at Ben Jason Dixon to try and give him some more minutes up against the Pumas, but I think if you're looking at the strongest, Pieter-Steph Toy has to be somewhere in your starting 15, and the benefit that he brings is also that versatility. So he could be a lock, he could be a loose forward, and either way, he can be a very handy player in your starting XV. But moving on to number 8, this is where I've actually gone with Elric Lowe. Now, Jesper Visser, the 2 games that we saw up against the All Blacks, first match I think was his better game. Second game he did end up getting himself yellow carded, but still had some decent moments while he was out there on the Cape Town turf. But Elric Lowe, I think every time he came off the bench up against the All Blacks, he just seemed to up the tempo, give the Springboks that little bit more front foot forward, and he's just a battering ram. He's had some great stats throughout this Rugby Championship. With the injury of Evan Ruiz, it was always talked about whether or not Eldrick Lowe was going to see plenty of opportunity in this Rugby Championship competition. I think that he's done enough to show that he should actually be in the starting lineup, and perhaps you have Vesa off the bench for one of the games, and then the other game he would start with Eldrick Lowe then coming off the bench as well. The other option they could eventually look at is perhaps moving Eldrick Lowe to 6, but I don't think I want to see it happen. I would rather see, if they're going to do something like that, perhaps giving the call up to Pepsi Buthelezi or someone along those lines, someone who has played more 6 throughout the URC. But Eldrick Lowe, once again, anywhere in that loose forward trio, the man can bring an impact in the same way that we do see from the great man Kwaka Smith, who just seems to keep on getting better each time makes his way onto the field. But we move on to the backline now. Number 9, this is where I've gone back to Cobus Reinach. I did like what Grant Williams did up against New Zealand, but the thing that let it down, I believe anyway, was the fact that they didn't partner him with Sasha Feinberg Ngome Zulu. So I don't think Grant Williams really got his pure potential chance, if that makes sense. But if they were going to partner him with Sasha Feinberg Ngome Zulu, I think it would have been a much stronger performance from Grant Williams, but I still like what he does off the bench, and also with that versatility, it allows the Springboks to go with the 6-2 split. I did like the 5-3 up against New Zealand, just because we saw Lukhanyo get a bit of a chance. We saw Sasha come off the bench alongside Jaden Hendrickse, but there is still potential of a 6-2 if you have Williams in the reserves. So I've gone with Cobus Reinach as the number 9, and number 10, I've gone back to Sasha Feinberg Ngome Zulu. Pollard, don't get me wrong, he's a fantastic player. I think that Pollard is still world class, but when you talk about tries and you talk about attacking threats, Sasha Feinberg Ngome Zulu at the moment, I believe, just brings so much more, and the perfect example is that second game up against the All Blacks. While Pollard was on the field, yes, there were a lot of other errors that were happening, but the Springboks only scored 2 tries throughout that game, one of which coming later on after they had made a couple subs, and that was actually when Sasha was on the field, even though he wasn't really involved in it, only kicking that ball into touch and then missing the conversion. But I still think that the Springboks looked more dangerous on attack when Sasha made his way on, so I think that up against Argentina, you give him the perfect opportunity to not just fine-tune his counter-attacking, because we know Argentina enjoy a kick or two, but also just showing what kind of player he is when he gets some open space. Defensively, he's solid. I'd have him as that Springboks number 10. But moving into the midfield, this is where I believe we will see changes up against Argentina, but if we're basing it off what is the strongest combo at the moment, it has to be number 12, Damian Dialindi, and number 13, Jesse Kriel. Now, Kriel, he had some good numbers throughout that second match, making 10 tackles. In the first game up against New Zealand, making 5, missing 3. Damian Dialindi in both games getting turnovers, more so in the first game than the second. So it actually worked out that Damian Dialindi, I would say he had the better game in the first match, even though he actually had a lot of running meters, the most out of any Springbok in the second test. But I still think that his first game with the turnovers did put him a little bit above what he did in the second, whereas Jesse Kriel, he had the better game in the second matchup. First game, he still made his important tackles, but he was a lot more prominent defensively in the second game, but not so much on attack. The ball was going straight through Damian Dialindi, so you could even put in an argument that Damian Dialindi in both games was actually better than Jesse Kriel, which is a bold statement, but, you know, defensively he wasn't too shabby. Damian Dialindi, and with those turnovers won and the meters made, be hard to argue. Jesse Kriel, I still think, is the best 13 that they have got available, even if he's had a couple quiet games up against the All Blacks. They've got Lukhanyo as a great option. 4 games up against Argentina. They'll probably play someone else in that centre pairing. I would like to see Moody go back into the centres rather than out on the wing. In this game up against the All Blacks most recently, like, he was all right, but he didn't quite look like he found his stride. So I'd like to see him back in the centres. Maybe partner with Lukhanyo would be the perfect option to go with. But in the back three, Kurtley Arendse as the number 11. Yes, he's got his head knock at the moment, and yes, he hardly had any game time up against New Zealand because of that head knock, but I would still have him in the starting lineup in terms of what could be the best Springboks team. Now, if you're basing it off what we saw, you'd probably say Cheslin Kolbe for who was the strongest left winger from the 2 games up against New Zealand. But the problem is I've got Cheslin Kolbe on the right wing, so I can't put him on both. Now, Makazole Mapimpi, I think that he will get minutes in the games up against Argentina, but I would still say that Kurtley Arendse, in terms of impact and in terms of try-scoring ability, that's a bold statement because Mapimpi scores a lot of tries, but I think Arendse, his strike rate at the moment is just that little bit higher, so I would have him out on the left wing in my best Springboks team. Number 14, this is where, like I said, I went with Cheslin Kolbe. He's pretty much leading the competition, I believe, in defenders beaten. He's a phenomenal player. Wherever you put him in the back three, he will be able to shine and having some really good moments up against this All Black side. Number 15, I've gone with Apalele Fasi. Now, Willie Leroux got his opportunity in the second match up against New Zealand. Apalele Fasi, he got his opportunity in the first game. Both of them getting a yellow card from that number 15 jersey, but I do think that Apalele Fasi on attack was a lot stronger in the first match up against the All Blacks. And Willie Leroux, he did have a relatively solid game on attack for the Springboks in terms of the stats. He had 43 metres made from 7 carries. But what that stat doesn't tell you is the amount of times that he dropped the ball throughout that second test up against the All Blacks, including, unfortunately, that one that he did get the yellow card for. He just seemed a little bit lost at times. And Apalele Fasi, he can play in that next Rugby World Cup. Whereas Willie Leroux, I believe he would have retired by then. So maybe now is about the time that they start looking towards the future. Now that they're on that massive high, beating the All Blacks twice in a row, winning the Freedom Cup back, getting the Rugby Championship. That is when, if you bring in your young guys and you continue to build their confidence, they may be able to get you more trophies for that next World Cup competition. So Apalele Fasi, he is who I've got at number 15. Defensively, he was criticised in that first match up against New Zealand. Willie Leroux, he made 1 tackle, he missed 1 in the second match, so not a lot of information defensively to go off for Willie Leroux, but I'd still go Apalele Fasi for that main reason of he's a lot younger and he's got a bright future for the Springboks. But Damian Valimza, he must be getting close to coming back for the Springbok side, so that also adds a little bit more tension in that number 15 jersey, because someone will have to make way for Damian Valimza if he is in form and if Rassie goes straight back to him when he does get back from his injury. But that is my Springboks Starting XV, ladies and gentlemen, that I feel would be an extremely strong one. Now, like I said, this is not what I believe they will go with up against Argentina. I think we're going to see a nice mix of the experience with the inexperienced players for the Springboks, and there's going to be some pretty awesome matches still to come of this Rugby Championship. But do let me know who you would go with in your Springboks XV moving forward. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. If you disagreed with anyone, also do let me know. At the end of the day, there will be a few differences, I believe, for different people, but that is half the fun of these XV videos, seeing the different opinions and seeing the reasoning behind it of why people would make certain changes in certain positions. But thank you all very much for tuning in. I'm going to go get out of this suit, and I'll see you all for the next one.